Follow along as I paint up Kor'sarro Khan of the White Scars, with a focus on making him a Jade power weapon. Originally this video was going to be about painting up white armor, but after 3 strikes, those plans changed. I first tried to build up a nice white base with the airbrush from like a bluish gray to white, while leaving the black in the recesses, but I ended up covering way too much, and it honestly looked like I just primed it with white sear. Strike 1. Then I tried to recover by glazing in some deep blue to the recesses for cool shadows, but it got everywhere and barely changed much. Strike 2. Then I began to add the base coats. I really focused on not getting the paint on the white armor, which I almost immediately and constantly failed at. When I tried to cover these mistakes up, the white ended up just being so blotchy that I called that strike 3. So I did the age-old method of giving it a nice dark oil wash using Starship Filth, made by a company I can't pronounce, so I'll put it on screen. I cleaned that up with some mineral spirits and then moved on to the highlighting. I struggled with the browns as I always do, and still working on the brush control for good edge highlighting. This was also my first attempt at non-metallic metals, but that was such a disaster that I won't even tell you what I did, because it will honestly only lead you astray. But once I finished, I was happy with the end result, as long as you don't look too closely at it. I then moved on to that power weapon, which I was happy with, and honestly the only reason I didn't just strip this model. I started by basing the blade in Incubi Darkness. I then took some pieces of sponge and taped them to some tweezers. I loaded that with a mixture of half Incubi Darkness and half Bright Jade. I deloaded that sponge and began to dab it on. The idea was to get that randomness of marble, but since I did this after I painted the rest of the model, I had to really apply pressure to get the paint on through those little nooks and crannies, so I ended up covering a little too much. I tried to recover this by repeating the process much lighter with just Incubi Darkness on the sponge until I was happy with it. I went back with the same colors and a brush to break up any areas that were too solid of one color, and then eventually got to a place that I was once again happy with. I then moved on to some brighter colors. Starting with just the Bright Jade by itself, I highlighted the edge of the blade with this and then began to kind of dab it on to break up the colors that were already on there. I also attempted to highlight the insides of those areas that were saturated with the half Bright Jade and half Incubi Darkness, covering up about 3/4 of that area. I then took Kraken Skin by Army Painter and repeated that process, trying to stay inside of the Bright Jade. And then lastly, I did this with a mixture of half Kraken Skin and half Titanium White, but only used this for like an extreme highlight. And then I moved on to the power weapon effects. I took Titanium White and tried to draw like a faint lightning streak, as well as highlighting that metal on the power supply piece. This was quite messy as usual, so I went back and cleaned that up with Kraken Skin and then kind of blended that in with that Bright Jade. I covered those white areas in a green fluorescent ink, which I forgot to film. Then once it was dry, I added some highlights of Kraken Skin and even smaller highlights with Titanium White. I took some Beeltan Green Shade to blend all this into the surrounding areas, trying to make the light of that power surge kind of fade out. Then once I was happy with that step, I called it done. And I took some glamour shots. Thanks for watching.